What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. With me, as always, is Pastor Leo. We are here to help you take a next step in your relationship with Jesus. We're so glad you're here. Hello, and welcome to episode 106 of the Grow Podcast. With me, as always, Pastor Leo. Hello, Pastor Leo.
¿Cómo está, everyone?
¿Cómo está? ¿Cómo está?
There you
¿Cómo
go.
está?
Yeah, you're learning.
I said it in person to a group of Filipinos on Sunday,
Yes.
and I did it terribly. But they're everyone at your church is so nice. They still applauded.
They were polite enough.
Celebrated me. It was very nice. And then immediately told me how terribly I said it. Actually, I think that was just Haniel. Everyone but Haniel was very nice,
Right.
and he was like, "That was Spanish." I'm like, "Thank you, Haniel. I did my best."
He takes after his mentor.
But yeah, we're on episode 106. My voice sounds like this, so apologies. Although I'll be honest, when I go back and listen or watch the Grow Podcast, just to how do we do? I can't stand the sound of my voice, so maybe this is better. I don't know. Let me know in the comments on YouTube if this is better than my normal voice,
Right.
and I'll try to.
He'll keep it that way.
I'll try to get a cold and then immediately coach a bunch of basketball games.
There we go.
Right away. And then I can continue to sound like this. But yeah, I apologize to everybody for this.
It's all right.
We're recording 2 episodes today.
Yes.
So I'm sorry everybody, but 107 is gonna sound like this too. And then hopefully I'll be back to normal. But I've been really enjoying these, Leo. They've been a good time.
Me too.
And I feel like I'm going to enjoy them more because it smells better in here today than normal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not any sort of comment on you or me or Michael producing. But you have brought something.
I came bearing gifts.
Which, okay, so you know how, the spiritual gift tests that they make you
Yes.
take? I'm not a fan of them.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I don't like any of those kind of tests.
Right.
Remember, Pastor Mike used to always make us take the personality tests, and he knew how much I hated them, and I know he just looked forward to there's a new one that I'm going to make everyone take,
Right.
because he knew it would drive me insane. But on the spiritual gift tests, so with the gift of tongues, for instance. This is not an episode of the Grow Podcast about tongues, but Scripture tells us it absolutely is a spiritual gift.
Yes,
but
it is.
If it's going to be used in public, there has to be someone there who has the spiritual gift of interpretation.
That's right.
At the same time. I feel similarly about those who have the spiritual gift of giving, that someone needs to have the spiritual gift of receiving in order to complement their spiritual gift. So I here today am willing to use my spiritual gift of receiving, which I'm not sure is an actual one. We're not to the teaching part of the Grow Podcast yet. Don't write this down in your notes. But I'm excited for the gift you have brought.
Yeah, what I have is the very famous Filipino spring roll. A lot of people call them egg rolls, but they're more like we call them spring rolls. In Tagalog, they're called lumpia.
Lumpia?
Lumpia. Remember, short A.
Lumpia.
There we go. Lumpia.
Nailed it.
There you go.
Fluent.
See,
Thank
somebody's
you.
learning. So for those of you who are watching,
Michael, you
There
should
you
come
go.
grab one for you to eat, and
Yep.
you can hold them up to the camera.
and that's the thing. A lot of
That's actually, there's 2 in here for you.
no, it's.
But
you,
just
you
take one
got
and I'll
3
eat your other
each
one.
because we have a lot more at home.
You got to eat one with us. You can have one of mine.
Okay.
Michael can have 3.
Sure.
I had a big lunch.
Yeah. And what a lot of people here in the US are familiar with them, but for the most part they're familiar with the ones that are not freshly cooked.
These are freshly cooked.
These are freshly cooked.
Man.
When I went home earlier, I cooked them, so really freshly cooked.
Oh
So,
my goodness!
For those of you who are
That noise is Michael getting some napkins to put the.
Yep, and that's the dip right there.
Okay.
These are for those of you who are at home. There you
Oh
go.
my word, they smell so good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate you. Everybody say hi to Michael. Not often is Michael on camera on the
Right.
Grow Podcast. This is the 3rd time now. So in the Philippines, traditionally, do you pair this with Dr. Pepper, strawberries and cream, 0 sugar? Is
Yeah.
that the traditional
We do.
drink that I have here?
Oh, soda. we do.
Okay. I'm going to get a good crunch into the microphone here. And then I'm going to back away for the chewing portion.
For those of you who are at home, that's for you.
I still hear the crunching.
Mm-hmm. It's there's a crunchiness to the wrapper if it's freshly cooked, but the longer it takes for people to eat, the soggier it gets. So
sure.
Yeah, but it still tastes great. It's just that you don't have that crunch anymore. And
is this like your family recipe?
Yes. Andy, my wife, made that. So
that's why they taste so good.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Andy's kind of the best.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like,
awesome.
we like you, Pastor Leo, but like if Andy wanted to do the podcast
we will
with
have
me,
her in this podcast sometime.
I like it. I like it. Not just for food.
Not just for food.
But also for food.
Especially for food.
Michael's favorite day of any day is when delicious food is brought in. And I'm pretty sure I'm on the same page. So
yeah.
For those of you who aren't in this room with us right now, I'm sorry. If you go to PH Church, sometimes you guys have a potluck. And
yes.
These will appear. Even if you go to New Hope.
Right.
Go say hello.
Right.
And
ask for
and then be like, can I have one of the lumpia?
Yeah, there we go.
Nailed
That's
it.
awesome.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
That's my word for the day.
If you are nearby, there is a Filipino restaurant up north in Crosby.
We were just talking about that in Crosby.
Mm-hmm.
They came down for our outdoor service over 4th of July weekend.
Yep.
Sold some food. I ate some of said food.
Yes.
And it was wonderful.
There we go.
They had these little like chicken skewer things.
Yeah.
Big fan.
So they're called the Carinderia.
Shout out. They're sponsoring today's podcast.
They're sponsoring today's podcast. No, but it's more of an Andy's.
Yeah.
Spring rolls.
Andy's Spring. Today, the Grow Podcast brought to you by Andy's Spring Rolls. If you would like to sponsor the podcast, give us food. And you can't be a real business either. But,
yeah.
Well, we should probably dive into Romans.
Mm-hmm.
We've been, excuse me, I may have to clear my throat a few more times than usual today.
Go ahead.
I will try to do it away from the microphone for everybody at home.
Yeah.
Listening to our beautiful voices, and then I just scream a cough into the mic. But so we're gonna finish the second half of we're gonna finish chapter 2 of Romans today.
Yes.
We're into the second half. So if you've been joining us, that's great. If you haven't yet, pause this one. Check out the first 3 we've done where we started Romans.
It's pretty cool.
Not that you can't just join us where we're at, but because of how we're doing this study on Romans, we're pretty continually referencing things we've already talked about.
Right.
Because this may shock you, but like Paul intended you to read the whole letter when he wrote the letter.
So it is a letter.
He builds on things as he's talking.
Right.
So definitely recommend that you check those other ones out if you haven't yet. They've been really great. I've been really enjoying them. We've got some really good feedback. We'd love more feedback, so you can leave a comment on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed yet, by the way, make sure that you do that. And then you got to turn notifications on. We've got some new subscribers. We had a song go up this last week that got us a bunch of new subscribers.
Yeah,
so
there we go.
Shout out to all the new subscribers. We're so glad to have you a part of our New Hope YouTube family. I don't know.
Kamusta, everyone?
Yeah. ¿Cómo está? ¿Cómo está?
There we
¿Cómo está? One of those. What Leo said, everyone. Or hello, if you speak English.
There
if
we
you
go.
speak a different language, I can't really help you with that one. But make sure you turn notifications on your phone.
Yep.
I've had a couple people tell me, I subscribed, and I'm not getting notified when the new episodes go up. You got to go into your settings and turn notifications on, because most of the time your phone will default to them being off.
Yep.
Because most of us don't like a million notifications all the time. So anyway, Romans. So we're in Romans 2 today, verses 17 through 29. So starting in 17, finishing out chapter 2.
Yes.
So Pastor Leo, while I finish my lumpia,
go ahead.
why don't you talk to us a little bit about just kind of the main talking points or things we should have walked away from as we read through Romans, the second half of Romans chapter 2.
Okay. Well, this one hurts for me personally because it hits very close to home. Before we go deeper, just a quick reminder of some things we went into the past few episodes. Again, that's why it would be great if you could listen to the other ones before this one. So including episode 102, when we were with Pastor Mike. And yeah, for the history nerds out there, it's our time to shine once again. But
all right, I'm back in. We're talking history. Yeah. I like that even more than food.
There we go. All right. For the others, excuse us while we nerd out for a bit. So it's the church in Rome was made up of Jewish and non-Jewish followers of Jesus. At one point, the emperor at that time, Emperor Claudius, he expelled all of the Jewish people out of Rome, kicked them out. And then a few years later, the people were allowed to return. And when they did, that's when they found the church. Call back to what Pastor Mike said in episode 102. He said when Paul would write letters like this to a city, a lot of the churches were made up of smaller groups, household groups. They met, but from time to time they would gather as a big group, but they also had smaller gatherings. But for the most part, they would all be collectively referred to as the church in Rome or the church in Ephesus or something like that. So Pastor Mike also mentioned in that episode that part of his letter to the church in Rome were for the Jewish believers, and part of it was for the non-Jewish believers.
You can imagine it would have been a really difficult time to be now. Like traditionally, there have been a lot of difficult times to be Jewish in a lot of places in the world. Right. But in this time period in Rome, unless you've studied that period of history, like the Bible doesn't really cover a lot of history once the New Testament hits, right? Like that's the New Testament is focused on the gospel and so the history that's taking place at the same time. It's not like the Old Testament where sometimes we're getting these names and battles and things that are happening very often. That's not a lot of what the New Testament is, but some of the most violent and effective uprisings against the Roman Empire from conquered territories. Obviously, there were a lot of battles they had from people that they weren't able to conquer. In Germania, they always had issues there, and Britain early in the Roman Republic and everything. But in Israel, the uprisings that happened in Israel were some of the most violent and effective, and difficult for the Roman Empire to deal with. And so that like when you just quickly mention, Claudius at one point says they're all out here. Well, that's because of what was going on over in what was once Israel. Because they're like, well, we can't trust these people in here in Rome when what's happening back in their home is what's happening, and so when they're allowed back in, you can imagine the amount of like distrust and basically what we would view now as racism. I don't know if they had that term specifically back then, but being a Jewish person in Rome at that time, and then even being a non-Jewish follower of Jesus, because you would have been tied from the Roman perspective, you would have been tied to the Jewish followers of Jesus, and this it's this weird sect of Judaism.
If you're a Jewish follower, you are included with those people.
Yeah. So a very interesting time. So as we read through verses 17 through 29, which one are they addressing? Are they to the Jewish believers? Are they to the non-Jewish believers? Are they? Where are we at right now?
Okay, so before I answer that, let's look back again at the previous episodes. Episode 104.
I told you we were going to call back to these episodes. I told you guys. I promised you.
We told you.
I'm a man of my word.
So there we go. So episode 104, Paul was addressing the people who were outright being stubborn. They were rejecting God. They were like the truth is right in their faces, and then they're just rejecting Him. They're coming up with other isms that, as long as it stems from the premise that there is no God, and then they would find a way to explain whatever is happening, or the origins of whatever, the universe, the earth, as long as it stems from the premise that there is no God. That's where they're at. So that's episode 104. Episode 105, the first part of the second chapter of Romans talks about the judgment that will be dealt to the people Paul was addressing in episode 104. So you keep rejecting it, then God will turn you over to whatever it is that you're doing. And then if you keep doing that, then here comes the judgment. So for being so stubborn and unwilling to turn to God's kindness, that's what's going to happen. So here, Paul is addressing a different group. Paul is addressing those who think that they're already in the safe zone, that they're already safe, that they're already on their way to heaven or paradise, meaning they're already in a right standing. They think they're already in a right standing with God on the basis of their religious heritage, their religious heritage and knowledge, and the religious practices and traditions that they observe. So these are the people who are of the religious type.
Sure. So give us kind of the like big overarching takeaway or theme or whatever, and then we'll kind of start diving in deep.
All right. So the TLDR, the too long didn't read version, right? Of what Paul is trying to teach us is Paul emphasizes that God looks at the heart. God looks at our heart, not the outward appearance, not what you look like, the clothes that you wear, or the practices that you observe, or the traditions that you follow. He looks at our heart, and that the true Jews, those who he considers as he considers as true Jews, are those whose hearts have been changed by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So I want to go there next to the true Jews, as you were talking about,
right?
Especially so verses 28 and 29, and we won't jump right to those verses, but just that, he's talking about how like no one is a Jew. I'm just going to read it from the ESV, verse 28. For for no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man but from God. But would there have been confusion? Because I know that sometimes there is now, as I read this, and I'm like, I thought it didn't matter if I was Jewish or not.
Right.
And now all of a sudden Paul is talking about like, I need to be like a true Jew, and I'm like, but I'm a Gentile. Like, am I on the outlook, stuck looking through the window here because I don't have Jewish heritage? So before you jump into like talking about what is a true Jew and what is not a true Jew, but like, why is he using that terminology there? And does that mean that I'm not included in this as someone who's not a Jew?
And that's the thing, because it's, and like I mentioned earlier, it's God looks at our heart, and you can be as religious as you want, but if your heart is not in right standing with God, if your heart is not in it, if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, Paul is basically saying, what's the point of doing it if your heart is not in it?
Yeah.
So it's and that's what God looks at. He's not looking at how many check boxes you've checked in the long list of things that the to do of being a Jew or being a Christian or being a follower of Jesus. He's looking at your motivation, your heart, why you're doing it, and what is the purpose of you doing it. If you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, kind of misses the point.
And we've talked about how like Romans, unlike a lot of his other books, wasn't written, okay, this one thing happened, I need to address it, I'm going to write this letter. But this is something Paul has dealt with at a lot of these other churches. And so you can infer that this is why he's making sure to include this, because he knows that, okay, this church in Rome has a collection of Jewish followers of Jesus and non-Jewish followers of Jesus. And in other areas, that has led to this problem where the Jewish followers have been like, well, you need to, either you're not as good as us because you're not following Jewish practices, or you need to follow Jewish the traditional Jewish practices in order to follow Jesus properly or whatever. And so it's not so much that, correct me if I'm wrong here, Leo, but it's not so much Paul's saying like we all have to be Jewish. It's he like, and you read that in verse 29 there, he's saying like circumcision isn't just this, the point of it wasn't this outwardly thing that does some weird magic when you do the physical act. It's the heart. It's the heart to follow the command. And obviously he's laying out like we have a different way to follow God now because of Jesus, but he's using kind of that language because of who he was writing to.
That's true. And that is right. Like if for example, let's just come up with something weird. Like if you to be a follower of Jesus, you need to color your hair red. And then I just colored my hair red just because I I don't know. I just wanted to be part of the group, but my heart is not in it. I don't really believe it. I don't actually subscribe to
our YouTube channel,
or to the ideology of being a follower of Jesus. I just wanted to color my hair red to be part of the group, or just to be considered, or just to consider myself as safe or saved.
Well, you could even use the Grow, like, maybe you do subscribe to the Grow podcast and you listen to every episode, but you just do it because that's what you're supposed, like, you think that's what you're supposed to do, not because you're genuinely trying to have this relationship with God that you're trying to grow.
You're really wanting to learn.
Yeah, you want other people to know, like, oh, yeah, David listens to the Grow podcast. Leo dyed his hair red.
Yep.
They're cool. They're a part of the club.
But I want to be part of it too, so I'll just do it. So, but if your heart is not in it, then Paul says, what's the point? Yeah. There is no point. So
talk to us then about what is, to kind of use Paul's language, like not a true Jew, not what does it really mean to not be a Jew in this scenario, in these verses?
Okay, so in a nutshell, let's break it down. In verses 17 to 20, again, if you haven't read it yet, pause this, read 17 to 20, and then come right back. In verses 17 to 20, Paul discusses how or why the Jews in Rome had a lot of pride in themselves, especially religious heritage and the religious practices. Again, we talked about this earlier. Religious heritage, religious practices, religious traditions, and then because they did it or they're doing it, they had a lot of pride in themselves. In verses 21 to 24, Paul discusses why banking solely on that heritage, on said practice, on said traditions, that they follow or observe or whatever it is that they're doing, it shows their hypocrisy. So it's pretty harsh words. Yeah. But that's the truth of the matter. Again, is if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, for the sake of looking like a Jew or being a Jew, but your heart is not in it, then you miss the point. So
I think it's interesting too that he doesn't he doesn't say that their traditions are inherently bad.
Right.
And I feel like often we end up in one of those camps, right? Where we end up like verses 17 through 20, where a lot of times, especially the American church, can just fall in love with their traditions, and that's the most important thing. And like this tradition, I mean, even I don't want to call out a specific type, but maybe the oldest type of Christianity that exists. Tradition is a massive part of Catholicism. I'm just going to say, and certainly not for all Catholics, but for some Catholics, the tradition becomes basically the thing that they worship, which is what Paul's talking about here.
Yep.
But there's nothing inherently wrong with, like, hey, we sing, this song every Christmas. That's a tradition we have at our church.
Right.
Well, that's not sinful to sing the same song every single year. It's sinful when that becomes your priority and the thing you worship over Jesus. And so he doesn't say, like, circumcision is bad and you need to stop, to use his analogy. He's saying it is not about an outwardly thing. And so if that's all it is to you, then it's irrelevant. Yep. Your traditions mean nothing if there's no heart behind them. I think it's important for us to hear on both sides, because I feel like I myself, and sometimes people my age especially, we fall on the exact opposite side, because I am a tradition person, but I feel like I'm so I don't want to say afraid, but maybe it's the right word, afraid of it in the church, that I'm almost like combative against tradition. I'm like, oh, that's your tradition? We're doing the opposite thing of that, just because of what what we've seen, the negative results we've seen tradition do in churches. But that's also not the right, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with those. We should be focusing on the heart, as God does.
I mean, tradition is not bad. There's nothing bad in tradition in and of itself, but you have to wrestle with the motivation behind it. Why are you doing it? And that's what Paul is saying here.
Sure.
So in verses 25 to 29, Paul discusses what real quote unquote Jewishness ought to look like.
Yeah, and then he goes into a ton of detail about these religious rituals, circumcision, like we talked about. A lot of rituals, a lot of knowledge. why does he, what's the why behind why those don't make us righteous before God? Because again, for hundreds, thousands of years, the Jewish people have been trying to follow follow these rituals,
right?
Thinking that they will make them righteous before God. Mm-hmm. So, and now Paul's like, nah. So what's the why behind that?
Well, okay. So as we mentioned earlier, the Jews in Rome were extremely religious. We need to pay attention to this because, truth be told, there are many people in the world today who are extremely religious as well. We talked about that briefly earlier. So
can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider yourself extremely religious? You're a pastor.
Yes.
Okay.
And no.
Because there's certainly a negative connotation that comes with the extremely in there.
Extremely religious in the sense that what I do, and again, there's always the heart behind it. The motivation and the heart behind everything that I do is because of my love for Jesus and my desire to follow him and do what he's asking me to do. In that sense, yes. But if it's just about you need to do this just so you need to do this,
sure,
or because it's a checkbox that needs to be done, then the answer is no. I don't do it just because I need to do it or just because everybody did it or everybody's doing it. I'm doing it because of my heart. My heart.
Yeah.
In my desire to follow Jesus. So yes and no.
Okay. So they had both. I mean, we have them now too, but the Jews in Rome, they had all sorts of rituals that they were following, right?
Oh yeah, they had sacrifices, they had cleansings and washings, they had circumcision. We talked about that earlier. They had special clothing, like they can't mix different kinds of cloths. And then they had meetings, they had yearly pilgrimages to Jerusalem, they memorized the Old Testament, and so on and so forth.
Sounds exhausting.
It is.
Pick like two of those, and I'm like, yeah, that might be a little much for me.
And that's what Paul is saying. Like all these things that you're doing, your religion can't save you. It's not the religion that saves you. Why? Because instead of trusting in God, the Jews in Rome, and truth be told, many people today started trusting in their religion and their own religious efforts. Like what we do is what saves us, instead of what Jesus did for me is what saves me and what's continuing to change me. So it didn't matter. Excuse me. I'm catching it.
my bad voice is spreading through the room. Michael, can you still speak? Mike,
no,
just a head nod. His is completely gone.
Uh-oh.
He just nodded his head.
Well, okay, so it didn't matter if their hearts were not attuned to God, and as long as they did what they were supposed to do. And many people today, unfortunately, have a just get it over and done with kind of mentality when it comes to this. I need to do it, so just get it over and done with. There, I've done it, done. Let me get out of here and go my own way now. So let's put it this way. It's like in your heart, there's very little difference when you're doing all the rituals and traditions and practices, and when you're vacuuming the carpet at home. Like my heart when I'm vacuuming the carpet and my heart when I'm doing this ritual is basically just the same thing. It's something that I have to do. Or when you're doing your laundry, or when you're washing your car, or it's there's
Leo,
very.
I don't wash my car.
Yeah, who washes their car in North Dakota, right? But yeah, it's just something that you need to get over and done with.
Yeah.
So if your heart is like that, if and that's what Paul is saying, if your heart is like that, you totally miss the point, because it's not about what you do, it's about the condition of your heart.
And that's why this is a different conversation than the one you mentioned earlier, and we had on a different podcast where it was more of a focus on people that just like completely rejected him or went away. They get their own section now, people that fall into this category.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like the section before was like no, I don't like God, or I hate God, or there is no God. This one is more of a we love God, but we show our love by doing what we're doing, even though our heart's not in it.
Yeah.
So
this is where when I knew I was going to love Pastor Mike, even long before I started working with him, was when we were having coffee one day, and somehow there was some sort of like traditional thing here that I was frustrated with in my job at the time. And it, like, the way we did it just made no sense, and I was trying to change it, and I just kept hearing from people like, well, that's the way we've always done it.
Right.
And I was like, that is a terrible reason to do anything. And Mike got all fired up about it because he hated that phrase too. I was like, I like this guy.
Yeah.
I'm glad he's my pastor. But that's kind of this group that he's talking to now. And and certain, like, by no means, and this is kind of where I want to go next, but by no means was this just like every Jewish follower of Christ fell into this category. Just like not every non-Jewish follower of Christ didn't fall into the other categories.
That's right.
This is a specific group of people that he was talking to, and but so I want to kind of end with it. Well, you might have something else to end with, but this message is clearly not just for Jews in Rome in the first century AD. It's for us now. It's for all of us. You know, I said earlier, there's, you know, certain churches, certain faiths that might struggle with this more, but it affects all of us.
It does.
Even like the most outward focused, progressive evangelical church that's like, we're keeping up with the times. There's still times where we fall into this, where we're like,
because it's easier.
Like, I just need to do what I'm supposed to do, and like you said, check the box, right? Like, okay, like even listening to the Grow podcast, like, okay, I listened to the Grow podcast, so I did my Jesus for the day. Like, I know that happens to me sometimes.
That's true.
It's probably happened to me a few times in recording 106 episodes of the Grow podcast.
That's true.
Okay, I've done my prep work for it, and like I didn't get, there was no heart behind it at all in my prep. Hopefully, when we've actually done the shows, I've gotten past that. But, but he wasn't just trying to badmouth these Jews in Rome, right? This was a message for all of us, clearly, to continue.
And like I said, because it's easier, because it doesn't involve changing anything in the way you live. It doesn't involve changing anything in the way you think, in the way you.
But we love change.
But we love change, and change is the only thing that's constant in our world.
Yeah.
So because it's easier, people fall into the trap of religiosity, quote unquote. So, Paul's message is for any person who is trusting in his religion. And again, that's the bottom line of what Paul is saying here. For those who trust in their religion and the religious acts that they do, rather than trust in God, rather than put their trust in God, that's these are the people that Paul was addressing in this part of his letter. So the lesson for this week is we need to come to a point where, and we have to, all of us, and again, David talked about it, and it's true. Even I myself find or catch myself doing the same thing sometimes, especially when it becomes too common. Like you're doing it every day, and it starts becoming a habit, and your heart is just not in it anymore. But it's something that you have to do. So we all fall short still, and we are all still guilty of the fact that we become a little bit too religious sometimes. But we need to come to a point where we examine ourselves and evaluate whether our lives are just like the Jews Paul was addressing here, or our heart is still in it. Paul reminds them and us that following religious laws, religious rules, and traditions, especially if you're doing it blindly or for the wrong reason, doesn't automatically equal to you are saved. Ta-da! Right? There's no such thing like that. And real quote unquote Jewishness, or in your case, or in our case, real Christianity is in our heart. It's when God's Spirit changes us from the inside and makes us want to do His will.
I think an important point here too is, I think traditionally in like the American evangelical church, we've struggled to. Again, I don't think this is New Hope. I see New Hope as being very opposite of this. It's one of the reasons I love New Hope. But we've been very, you need to be a certain way before you come here. And that's just, religion in general. We didn't invent it. We just embraced it.
Yep.
And that's where that makes no sense, because like you said, it's not about following these rules and, okay, you have to look this way or talk this way or act this way, and then you can be a part of this religion that will fix everything. It's, you need Jesus.
Right.
And he's going to fix it. Like, if he's truly working in you, and this isn't the part we're on right now, but if he's truly working in you, we're going to see those results and those fruits after he gets to work. You know, the Holy Spirit starts to work in you. But so often our instinct is like, well, that person doesn't look like they belong here, you know, or like, why is that person here? They're not living the right type of life to be coming to this church here. And it's like, well, I'm glad they're here. Like, that's the person we should be thrilled is here, because they need it just as much as anybody else. And it's cool that they're here. And I feel like those are the moments where we put, you know, when we put it in our modern context, those are the moments where we focus more on our, like you said, our religious or our religion or our religious acts, right? Someone walks in and they're not dressed how we think they should be dressed at church, or they don't speak how we think they should speak at church, or a certain part of their lifestyle doesn't match how we think their lifestyle should be. And our immediate reaction should not be to reject that person, like, you don't belong here, until you fix how you're living. How are they ever going to fix how they're living if they don't learn that their living is wrong? We've talked about that before too. So
that is true.
I think that's where you see it a lot in today's world, in our church, and, you know, especially those of us here in the American Evangelical Church. And if we grew up in that, I know that's something that I've seen a lot with people that I love that just get rejected by the church, and I'm like, but they need it. That person needs it real bad.
That is true. That is true. So yeah, it's and again, this is why I love that this Matthew West song. The lyrics goes, "Why don't you do something?" So I shook my fist at heaven and said, "God, why don't you do something?" And he said, "I did. I created you." So that's it's pretty sobering when you think about it that way. So so again, for the listeners this week, let's ask ourselves, like, what is the motivation for doing what I'm doing? What is my motivation for doing what I do? Why am I doing this? Why especially when it comes to the things that we do for Jesus. Yeah. And we think that we're doing it for Jesus, but let's examine our hearts. Yeah. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And in preparation for next week, your next steps will be to read Romans chapter 3, verses 1 to 20, because that's our next one. But before we do that, let's examine our hearts. Let's examine the condition of our hearts, because it's our hearts that God is looking at, not the things that we do or the practices, the traditions that we follow.
It sounds like some stuff we learned in the Old Testament. It's almost like Paul didn't just like make all of this up.
I wonder weird. How.
That's weird. Well, thank you, Pastor Leo. And thanks to all of you for joining us. As always, that new episodes go up every Monday, so we hope that you'll be with us next time. But we always say it on the Grow Podcast, growth always starts with a next step. So that's a really good next, and honestly, a really easy one.
Yes.
I should say easy in practice. And then, like, you do it, and you're like, oh, I don't like the road this is bringing me down. I'm angry at Pastor Leo now, but we'll get to that later. You can send your angry emails to Leo, not to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good question for us. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing
I'll make
that
sure
this week.
To forward them to David.
And thank you. But I do think, you know, especially for me working at a church, I think that's something I should put into practice just with my, like, day-to-day stuff at work. But for all of us, you know, like when I'm gonna even just when you're heading to church next Sunday, or next, you know, when you're listening to the Grow Podcast next week, or when you go to read Romans chapter 3, 1 through 20 before you start, why am I doing this? Like, am I doing it because Leo told me to, and on Sunday I want to be able to tell him I read so that he thinks I'm holy? Or am I doing it because I really want to learn and grow in my relationship with God? Because clearly, as we've learned from Paul here, one of those is the way we're supposed to do it. So
one of these things are not like...
Please continue. Thanks to all of you. We love you, New Hope family. And to clarify, New Hope family is just everybody that connects with us through New Hope, through any of our church plants. Even if the Grow Podcast is the only way you connect with us, you are a part of our New Hope family. And so we love you. We're so glad that you're here, and we will see you next week.
Ingat.